Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, welcome to Series 5, Episode 19 of Hashtag Psychotherapy Unfogged. As you know, I'm Mark Fielding, psychotherapist and relationship counsellor, and your host. Today, I have the absolute pleasure to interview Leslie Crudup Villagarcia. Um, Goodness me, you bring so much to the table, Leslie. I mean, if I described you, as a coach and polyamory mentor, that would be really only touching on the millions of things that you do. Hopefully we'll get a chance to cover some of the things that you do. But thank you so much for coming on, Leslie. Really nice to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I mean, just as an introduction, I'm going to read off of Leslie's LinkedIn profile. And Leslie writes, uh, I'm a life coach, polyamory mentor, and motivational speaker who rejects toxic positivity culture in favor of navigating the real life circumstances affecting people's ability to excel in their lives. I've been a lifelong challenger of social constructs related to success, relationships, and authority. As a staunch supporter of marginalised groups and the vice president of the Pride Business Network, I have a special interest in the intersection between the personal development industry and social justice movements, recognising the need for coaches to be aware of the impact that our practices have on communities with various levels of privilege. I hold 3 citizenships, USA, Peru, Australia, and have worked professionally as an educator, trainer, workshop facilitator, curriculum developer, and e-learning designer for businesses and universities in New York City, Europe, Asia, and Australia. I'm currently based in Brisbane, QLD, working full-time in my private coaching practice, Leslie V Coaching, which I founded in early 2019. And obviously we'll supply all of Leslie's links with the show notes and with our social media sites at the end of the show. Leslie continues to write, I empower my clients to take control of their lives and forge a purpose-driven mindset. I do this using a model I've developed over my extensive experience working with communities around the world to develop strong communication, research, and critical thinking skills. As a holder of a master's degree in applied linguistics, I also have a keen awareness of the power of language to encourage change in individuals, communities, and society as a whole. My ongoing professional development includes ravenous study of helping modalities, including but not limited to acceptance and commitment therapy, strictly used within the ethical bounds of coaching, narrative therapy. That's an approach I love, Leslie. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Motivational interviewing, bibliotherapy, and specialist life coaching certifications. Uh, Leslie's Meetup Com group, the Vanguard Book Club for Personal Development, has been attracting attendees from across the globe for monthly discussions of personal development books since its inception in May 2021. We meet online and in person at her office, and it's an open group that people from internationally can join. Fantastic. So, Leslie, let's kick off with an enormous question. Tell me a little bit around the life experiences that have led you to this point.
Oh, well, the short version is that all of the work that I was doing in the educational space and the training space and that kind of thing was great. It was fulfilling. I got to bring a lot of myself into what I was doing, but there were some changes that happened in the structure of the last place that I worked in that made it clear to me that the academic side of the work that I was doing was becoming less fulfilling to me than the actual student support side.
Yeah.
Because I was working with students from all over the world at this university, and a lot of them came in facing these huge demands academically, culturally, and all of that. But there wasn't enough space in the curriculum to actually dive into those things that needed to be sorted in order for them to actually succeed without, like, nearly killing themselves.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
That's really strong language that I don't
Mm,
like to resort to a lot, but some of these were really young kids. Some were older students with families, and they were just kind of thrown into these situations. And it's like,
mm,
okay, sink or swim.
mm,
So I knew that I wanted to transition out of that space. And
mm,
at the time, I was also going through a lot of struggles in my own life relating to trying to keep a pregnancy,
yeah,
among other things. So I
yeah,
was seeing a lot of different mental health professionals and different support professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists. I saw my own therapist, um, who I was seeing one-on-one, but also with my partner, a social worker as well. I was seeing so many different people that at one point I was like, I can't do this anymore.
yeah, yeah,
I felt like one of the things that I kept coming out of these meetings with was this internal critique of how the meeting had run and wondering if what I needed was something completely different.
mm,
And it occurred to me that what I needed to do was be on the other end of those discussions
mm,
in a professional capacity. I still work with a therapist when I need to. I believe very strongly in counseling, psychology, all of those things.
yeah,
But in my circumstances, career-wise, I knew that it was showing me something else as well.
mm, yeah,
So
yeah,
that's what really drove the transition. I was going to go into counseling, but my mom, she was a counselor for over 30 years.
yes, yeah,
And I saw how it affected her. She's a very empathetic person, very family driven. It impacted the way she parented us, for better or for worse,
mm,
myself and my sister.
yeah,
My sister has been a social worker for a number of years. She's returned to studies to become a therapist.
yeah,
My dad, who was a mentor throughout his engineering career, he still does engineering. Now he runs a consultancy. So all of these things have been in my blood.
yeah,
And when I learned about coaching specifically, I realized that was a much better fit for my personality. I'm a big goofball. And not that it's just about being a goofball, but I was like, I know for me that I want to come out of each of these sessions feeling inspired
yeah,
myself.
yeah,
I want to come out of these sessions. I didn't really want to sit in really dark places with people every day
yeah,
just because I knew how it would impact me.
yeah,
I
yeah,
get to bring together my talents, my personality skills, my studies in life coaching,
mm,
and everything else into my private practice in a way that I'm just so grateful to have taken the chance to do.
yeah. Yeah, and I was struck. I mean, just pulling in a couple of things that you just said. I mean, I was struck by your family really are all in different ways, kind of involved with helping people, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, really. Yeah, and I hear you around. I guess you went into life coaching, partly rather than maybe psychotherapy or counseling psychology because you wanted to really, really kind of motivate people, I guess, to grow. I guess that's the energy rather than,
Yeah.
and of course, I mean, obviously I'm a psychotherapist. I mean, obviously there's a place for sitting in those dark spaces, but I guess you just wanted a different approach. And I guess it has kind of pulled you forward into, what is a very successful career. I mean, this would be probably a good time to ask about, I mean, let me ask about the coaching programs that you offer. I mean, could you just say a little bit about your business and what you offer?
Mm. So
Yeah.
from its inception, motorbikes, from its inception, my
Okay.
coaching practice
Yeah.
has involved three standard programs that I run.
Mm,
So one program involves fortnightly sessions, face to face or online, with check-ins and various inclusions in between.
mm.
And then I have two more tiers that are weekly sessions, with the
Okay.
top tier being like a 90-minute session where we can really dive into the deep stuff
Mm.
every week and really drive people forward when they're
Yeah.
coming in either with a very specific goal or when they know that they have to change something. They're
Mm.
not necessarily sure what it is, but they're committed to figuring it out and attacking it
Yeah.
with all of their energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the basic structure
Mm.
of my coaching programs, but especially with everything that's happening since 2020, I do a lot of customizing of the program structure
Mm.
because all of the programs involve a lot of customization for each client because one thing that I learned in my many years in academia is that we can't just apply a one size fits all approach to people.
So true. No, obviously. Yeah, it's so true,
Yeah,
Leslie.
exactly.
Mm.
And it always bothered me when I would see programs that were based on like this system. You go through this step-by-step process, and if you come out the other end and you haven't succeeded by, the coach's definition of success, it's
Yeah.
because you've done something wrong because you didn't follow the program properly. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
So when I say program, it's just the way I structure the sessions together.
Mm.
It's like it's more like, but it's the model within it that really creates the change.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess with, I mean, I'm just wanting to kind of pull in, because there's a lot of kind of work that has gone into, and obviously mindset around social justice, and yeah, I mean, I'm trying to ask you questions that we couldn't talk about for 2 hours. I'm going to ask you a little bit around the people that come into your coaching practice from marginalized groups, and how the tailor-made coaching practice would be much more helpful for them than something that is much more homogenized, much more maybe heteronormative, much more, yeah, kind of, yeah, much more for privilege. I just wondered whether you
Mm.
could say a little bit more about that, about working with marginalized groups.
Yeah, when someone comes into my office and they're describing an experience that is very much colored by their particular marginalization,
Yes,
that's something that I have to take strongly into consideration, especially as I listen to their story and try to understand their perspectives.
yes,
Because I have a few intersecting marginalities
yeah,
myself, being a Black Latina woman who's also pansexual, queer,
yeah,
partner, and being neurodivergent myself, and all these other things. It's
yeah,
not as simple as like, I'm a Black woman and this is my experience, or I am a woman on the autism spectrum and this is my experience.
mm,
It's very interconnected.
yeah,
So when other people come in who are navigating these different
mm,
experiences, I always ensure that I'm checking my own privilege and my own position as a listener,
yes,
as the person they've come to seeking support, so that I, A, can avoid traumatizing them in some way by saying
definitely,
something really ignorant,
yeah, totally,
and so that I can speak mindfully about their their struggles and how we can navigate them. For
yeah,
example, if you have someone who is completely able-bodied with a lot of money, with a lot of privilege and so on, they'll respond to different mindset work than someone who doesn't have that level of privilege.
totally. It's completely
And
different. Yeah,
that's where a lot of like mindset bypassing and cliches need to be avoided.
yeah,
Like I would never tell anyone coming into my office that, we all have the same 24 hours in the day. So you just have to do this, this. This other guy did it. Why can't you?
yeah. Oh, goodness me, that's crazy,
Especially
isn't
someone from a marginalized community, because it's like,
it?
okay, hang on a minute. If a client comes in to my office and they're struggling with something
Mm,
that I'll just pull an example out of the air. Say it's like a workplace situation
mm,
where they're struggling with someone higher up in the structure who is discriminating against them because of their race, their religion, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Any mindset work that we do isn't to say like, oh, well, this is how you're gonna work harder, hustle better so that you can get that promotion. It's like, no, it's gonna be about finding the tools and resources that they have within themselves, within their support systems, that will help them identify the opportunities to find change
Yeah.
that will be meaningful and fulfilling for their own lives.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of motivation, it's really pulling those things out of them in a way that isn't dismissive of what they're actually going through.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And also, and this is maybe a bit of a simplistic statement, but in terms of the bandwidth, I mean, somebody that comes to you with, multiple intersectional kind of personalities, I mean, the bandwidth for change must be really, really small compared to someone that has a lot of privilege, because someone from a marginalized community, is using a lot of bandwidth just to get through multiple systems of oppression and live a life every single day. So the bandwidth they have in order to really focus with change and goals, is probably a lot less, really, because just living is taking up all their time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For people in those situations, one thing that I tend to spend more time on than for some other people is finding the time and the opportunities to rest.
Yeah.
Because, like, when we're telling like a high-flying executive, like, Fortune 500 CEO, like, get some rest. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go to my summer home or my bigger yachts for my second international holiday, and I'll just get the rest of the people in the company to take care of stuff.
Yeah.
That's a very different kind of access to rest than someone who is terrified of looking like they're not hustling because they're under higher scrutiny within their workplace, within their industry, and because they live within a community that is stereotyped as being lazy or making a lot of mistakes or being an unqualified diversity hire who is constantly having to prove themselves.
Yeah, I'm kind of exhausted.
So finding the opportunities to just put the tools down is more nuanced than just saying, give yourself permission to have a nap. It's like, okay, like, yes, naps are great. I advocate for naps, but some people have to navigate some very challenging feelings, even about the capitalist system that we live in.
Yeah, for sure.
In order to be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is, that is absolutely true, and then this is why I think the work you do is so important, and the way you obviously really really kind of personalize your coaching programs in order to really meet the individual where they are. Yeah, I mean, goodness me, you must hear. I mean, just in terms of working with intersectionality and systems of oppression, goodness me, Leslie, you must hear some very painful stories of people in the world with marginalized communities and their struggles. I mean, you must hear that a lot, right?
I hear painful stories,
Yeah.
but very purposeful ones.
Yeah.
And this is something that in some ways my this is like an interesting note about privilege, right?
Yeah.
That's one way in which my status as a Black Latina woman gives me privilege in those situations, because if I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of white women's tears.
No, I have to admit, I've not heard that, Leslie. No.
Okay. I'm going to grossly oversimplify the concept,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
When someone is talking about race, and we can use that as a catch-all for other kinds of marginalization
Yeah.
to someone with a lot of privilege. For example, a white woman,
Mm.
to the
Yeah.
point where she gets really upset and overly sympathetic,
Mm.
and that's where the tears come in.
Mm.
It can derail a conversation very quickly
See what you mean? Yeah.
because it turns into a situation where that marginalized person then feels this societal burden to make the white woman, who again is just a stand-in for a privileged person in this context, to ease their suffering,
Yeah.
to make them feel better about our own suffering.
Yeah.
And that is exhausting.
Mm.
That is one reason that some people of color, people from various marginalizations, have a barrier in seeking counseling, coaching, therapy, because it's like, oh, I don't have time for a white woman's tears today. I'm going to tell this very painful
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
It's going to take that much more effort to explain my situation to
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
person
For
in a
sure.
historical context,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to get anything out of it myself.
Yeah.
So when I do hear
Mm.
painful stories from various marginalizations,
Mm.
in some ways, and again, I do have a lot of privilege in different ways. I don't identify with every marginalized community.
Mm.
I can walk hand in hand with them
Yeah. See what you mean?
in
Yeah.
ways that not everyone else
Mm.
can.
Yeah.
So we can skip the part where I get really like sympathetic and upset.
Mm.
And we can skip the part where they have to justify or they have to prove to me how much they're suffering by acting overly upset or acting overly sad.
Yeah.
If they express their pain in a way that's, darkly comedic
Mm.
because they'll know that I get it,
Yeah.
they can come out of that session
Yeah.
having done a lot less work to get up to that place of functioning again.
Yeah, I mean that makes so much sense. I mean, you actually take off a whole layer for the client, stroke clients, and you can just get on. I mean, again, it really fits the kind of coaching model, doesn't it? So you can understand, you don't have to spend sessions and sessions sitting in, a truth that possibly, you've both experienced or you certainly are both aware of. You just strip all that away and then you start working with the person and you start working, towards their goals. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that really resonates, Leslie. I'm just going to move around a little bit and just talk a little bit around your work with polyamorous and couples in alternative kind of relationship models. I wonder
Okay.
whether you could just say a little bit about that, maybe your personal experience in the poly community and your work with poly couples. Would that be okay?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because I always try to tell this part of the story being very mindful of not outing anyone. But let's just say I, from a very young age, had had models around me that were very accessible
Mm.
of how an open relationship can function in a healthy way.
Yeah.
That's how that's what I'll say about that.
Okay.
And so it's something that was never like taboo or scary to me. There were periods in my youth where I was, I had tried to arrange a thruple of sorts. I'm
Mm.
not sure how I feel about the word thruple from a linguistic standpoint, but we'll say thruple. That's fine. Um, in high school, didn't quite work out because, for polyamory to work, everyone kind of has to be on board. But a lot of my relationships in my adult life for a long time were monogamous because that's who I was finding myself partnered with, people who are monogamous.
Sure.
And I got married to someone under the kind of umbrella of monogamy. But my partner is also very philosophical. So when I started getting a bit sweet on a mutual friend of ours who had come to visit and I found myself getting quite close with in a way that my partner could see happening and was actually okay with.
Mm. Okay.
It gave us enough emotional space to have a conversation about, seeing if we could explore relationships with people outside of our marriage in a way that was A, respectful of
Mm.
ourselves as a couple, and then B, ourselves as individuals, but C, being the important thing, respectful of anyone else that we relate to. My
Yes.
partner's name is Tony, and we were like, this is not going to be the Leslie and Tony show. We are not going to be that couple that opens up and just starts experimenting on people all willy-nilly, saying, well, it doesn't matter if they get hurt because
Yeah.
we're the ones who are important.
Yeah.
That flies in the face of ethical non-monogamy.
Yeah.
The ethical part matters.
Yeah.
I'm a very strong advocate for taking special consideration that you're not treating other people like secondary characters in your own personal development journey.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
the same goes for treating people you're dating as secondary characters who then become collateral damage in the name of your, primary pairing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is such an important conversation. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because I guess with people that there's a lot of ignorance, I think, still, around ethical non-monogamy. I mean, I think it's changing, which is a good thing, but I still there is a lot of stereotyping, and I think often people and I think nothing about the community think oh, it's sex or opening up a relationship. It's just about bringing in different sexual partners. But goodness me, it's so much more than that. And when you talk about the primary relationship and the secondary relationship, these are relationships, and these relationships need to be developed, depending on, what the boundaries are when you go into the relationship. They need
Yeah.
time. There's a lot more going on in these relationships just than just sex. I mean, sex is important, of course, but these are relationships, right? And I don't think people always get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, before any polyamorous people listening get upset, I'm being very mindful of the fact that we are speaking in hierarchical terms here,
Yeah. Yeah.
with the understanding that not everyone practices a hierarchical form of polyamory.
No.
Yeah. But in my situation,
Mm.
I do practice there's kind of a natural hierarchy because
Mm.
my nesting partner is the person I'm married to. My other partner lives overseas. I'm in Australia, he's in New Mexico.
Mm.
So it's kind of that's where this natural hierarchy falls in. And
Fine.
clearly that connection is not about sex
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
can't do a whole lot through a WhatsApp chat in that department.
No.
So it's like it's about so much more.
Yeah, and in terms of the hierarchy, I mean, I'm thinking about. I mean, obviously, you're going to know a lot more about this than me, Lizzie. But I'm thinking about kind of relationship anarchy, and could you just say a little bit for our listeners around the different kind of the different models on the tree of ethical non-monogamy? I mean, I know that there's a lot, but just to give our readers an idea about what you mean when you're talking about hierarchical polyamory.
Okay. Well, ethical non-monogamy, we can look at it as an umbrella
Yeah,
under which you would find things like polyamory
yeah,
or open relationships
yeah,
or swinging,
yeah,
which is also a form of open relationship anarchy
yeah,
under that umbrella as well,
mm,
because in that kind of way of relating, you're really you're essentially creating your own custom package for
mm,
the relationships
mm.
that you have with each of your connections.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there may not be any hierarchy at all, and you have to really be clear on your agreements and your expectations
Yes.
because even fewer assumptions can be made in relationship anarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, embracive of all sorts of relationships, isn't it? As far as I understand, friendships, romantic relationships, there's also kind of solo poly. Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
I think people that don't really, have any understanding of the area think it's very, very rigid. It's quite a rigid area. Maybe I don't know, maybe there'd be three people in a relationship system. But goodness me, it's so much more. It's so much wider than that. And I think the fluidity is something I'm always struck by in ethical non-monogamy models. It's so fluid, and things can develop and things can change, and there's a lot of scope, isn't there, for change and fluidity, which I think often, the kind of traditional socially constructed models do not have.
Yeah.
It's a burgeoning area, and also something about the community. I mean, building community. I mean, it could be argued that society is stepping away further and further and further away from community. With social
Yeah.
media, it might be a reason for that. But the kind of alternative relationship community are creating community and expanding, going the opposite way, going a much more healthy way, personal opinion, really,
Yeah.
really, there's so many positives, I think, here. I mean, let me just ask you around, what are your experiences as a Black woman, Latino woman within the poly community? Because my feeling would be your experiences would be different from someone like maybe, I don't know, a white man, white woman. Yeah,
Yes. Well,
yeah,
one of the idiosyncrasies
yeah,
of being a woman of color
yeah,
and of the particular colors that I am in this
yeah,
kind of a space is that we already have social stigma attached to us around sexuality.
yeah,
Black women are highly sexualized in the media, and
yeah,
historically, there was a time not long ago in the United States where it wasn't even illegal to rape a Black woman because it was said that it wasn't possible because we just wanted it all the time. And such was the same for Black men in the US.
yeah, yeah,
As Black people,
yeah,
well, there were a lot of stereotypes around being very promiscuous, having lots of babies from with a lot of different partners that we just don't take care of.
yeah,
And then with Latinas, the hot-blooded Latina, it essentially becomes like I'm always very mindful of being fetishized.
yeah. I'm
You know?
glad you've used that word. Could you just explain what that is for our listeners? This is really important. Yeah,
Yeah. It's like being approached in a sexual context in a way where the approacher is only really looking at you as a representative of your race
yeah, okay,
and, well, racial fetishization,
mm,
um,
yeah,
rather than who you are as a person.
yeah,
If someone thinks like your dark skin is very attractive, that's very different than saying like, oh, I haven't had sex with a Black one yet. Like I'm gonna tick that box, and it's like, oh my gosh, no, no.
mm, goodness,
So I often find that even like on dating apps and stuff, I've had to just walk away a lot of times because it wasn't very long into a conversation where someone would ask me if I was open to race play. I was like, no, this conversation's done.
yeah,
And it's like,
yeah,
I'm not here to fulfill some master slave fantasy on the plantation.
no,
And it's weird when people you've never even met will ask those questions. It's like what people do in the context of their own established sexual
mm,
relationships
mm,
is their business. But
mm,
these are complete strangers. And
yeah,
that's one way in which it's really challenging.
mm,
And for a lot of people, specifically in African American communities,
mm,
one of the challenges that is faced, and I know that this is also the case for a lot of people in African communities,
yeah,
people from the African diaspora, there can be a very strong religious stigma that makes families a lot more skeptical when you decide to open up to an ethically non-monogamous lifestyle
yeah,
or come out as ethically
yeah,
non-monogamous.
yeah,
There's a different sort of attachment to, especially people from like Christian faiths that see it as just completely taboo
yeah,
in a way
yeah,
that's it's kind of getting into like the differences between white Christianity and black Christianity, which is like well out of the scope of this conversation.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
But
it
I
gets
guess
tricky.
yeah, because I mean stigma, I mean it is changing, but people that in kind of in different relationship models do experience stigma, But I guess what you're saying for for a woman of color, for someone from a kind of less privileged community, if I could put it like that, the stigma is potentially more from family, from outside. There's objectification, there's fetishization, really. I mean, so there's so much. I mean, this is obvious, I know, but there is so much more to deal with for someone from a marginalized community, even in the poly
Mhm.
community, which is, pretty open and pretty welcome, really. There's all sorts of things, of hurdles to manage, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because one thing that you said before about people in ethically non-monogamous communities, one thing that makes it so beautiful is the emphasis on communication and community
Yeah.
care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where it's that much more important to find a feeling of safety within groups of like-minded people, either in one's local community or in online communities,
Yeah.
because we can talk about our experiences. There are a lot of online communities that have a very specific rule that you are not to directly message any members without publicly requesting permission to do so.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's things like that that help people feel safer
Yeah.
because there are also a lot of people who are either completely new to ethical non-monogamy and genuinely will make hurtful mistakes, but there are also a lot of people who masquerade within these communities. They
Yeah.
see the potential for lots and lots of sex with a bunch of people
Mm,
who just want to have sex with a bunch of people,
mm.
and they'll just go in and create a lot of damage.
Mm, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just ask? Goodness me, we're running out of time already. I knew this would happen, Leslie. We've not touched on half the things I wanted to ask you, but could you just say a little bit about your work with individuals, groups, and couples that perhaps are thinking about changing into a non-monogamous relationship model, or already in one? A big question, I know, but what's the kind of work you do with? Couples that come or people that come, to talk about different relationship models and their engagement within them.
Hmm.
Are there general themes?
The most common themes
Yeah,
are communication,
yeah,
jealousy,
yeah. Okay,
insecurity,
okay.
and creating, well, expressing expectations and uh, what's the word? Agreements and expectations,
Yes, yeah, yeah,
which involves a lot of talk about boundaries.
yeah.
We have to
And
unpack
yeah,
a lot of the monogamous thinking around rules
yeah.
and speak in terms of boundaries.
Yeah. And the communication, yeah, I mean, particularly, obviously for anyone in any relationship, romantic or otherwise, communication is the cornerstone of any good relationship for me. But I guess with a relation with people that are in kind of multiple relationships, I guess communication, boundary setting, parameters, everybody knowing what is going on, what the parameters are, which I guess is, facilitated by communicating, is even more important, would you say? Because there are more moving parts. So I guess the communication within those parts needs to be a lot clearer, so everyone knows exactly what's going on.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. It needs to be much more specifically pronounced
yeah,
in a way that I and a lot of people think monogamous people could really learn from.
yeah. That's not the first time I've heard someone say that actually from the poly community.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to be
Rather
learned,
than
actually.
assuming that a particular behavior is going to be
Mm,
appropriate for one person because it's appropriate with a different person,
yeah,
it's like, oh, wait a minute, I have to actually talk to this people about what their needs are, what their expectations, and what our
yeah,
reasonable ways of behavior are. And
yeah,
this person have to have another conversation and actually do some work.
yeah. And even the conversations with the primary partner, are ongoing. I mean, you probably get asked about jealousy all the time, and so maybe let's not go there today. But just in terms of managing maybe any feelings of kind of insecurity, the communication, I think with the I mean, if it is a hierarchical poly relationship with the primary couple, it's got to be great, right? because I guess one would hope that, if there is some insecurity, there's some jealousy, that can be contained within the primary partnership, and each person can emotionally regulate that in the other. But I guess if it's not communicated, then the opportunity for that kind of connection is not there, it's lost, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really about tapping into where those insecurities come from, what triggers those insecurities, and what we can actually learn from them.
Yeah.
And if there's any work that we need to do, like on ourselves as individuals, like with clients who I've worked with, it's like, oh, okay, this is why I felt this way. And this actually awakens something that I've been wanting to work on for a while.
Yeah.
Now we can put things in place to work on it,
Yeah.
which of course doesn't apply if the other partner is actually just engaging in behaviors that are unethical and that's making this person insecure. Yeah. So it's that whole dance as well. It's like checking in with our own ethical behaviors
Yes.
has to
Yeah.
be a commitment that is ongoing.
Def definitely, and the fluidity of all of the relationships, within the model. I mean, the relationship's constantly changing. So I guess, I guess these conversations and the emotions that come up for, everyone involved are going to be constantly changing, constantly developing. I mean, it's just so fluid, isn't it? So the communication really has to be ongoing, because, one chat around what's going on is not
Yeah.
gonna work, is it? Because it's everything is developing and everything is changing. Leslie,
Yeah.
if people want to get hold of you, and obviously we'll share all of your links on our social media sites and with the show notes, but could you just tell our listeners, if people want to get hold of you for, for anything that you offer so much, how do they do it? How do they get in touch with you?
I usually say go to my Instagram, which is
Okay.
Leslie B Coaching. Um, but if you really want to dive in right away, going to my website is a great start
Yeah.
because right on the front page, I've got a booking link for a free intro consultation. I always do the first one for free for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
And on the website, there's also links to my podcast, which is like my big
Yes.
project currently.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't even
But yeah,
asked you about
booking
them,
through
but
my website, sending me an
yeah.
email, sending me a message on Instagram,
Yeah.
those are all good.
I must ask you about your podcast. I haven't asked you. Tell our listeners about your podcast, if you would.
My podcast is called Thriving Between the Lines. It is it's an examination of personal development books through the lens of intersectionality.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
looking at some of the most beloved titles and going, maybe not. um, looking at things like, okay, the five love languages, for example, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, let's look at this from the perspective of women or people in emotionally abusive relationships. Let's look at the magical art of tidying up from the perspective of someone with ADHD. And
Yeah.
it's things like that. Looking
Yeah.
at the big titles through the lens of someone from a marginalized community. And I think it's quite funny.
Yeah. I
My
mean,
host and we put a lot of work into it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would really encourage our listeners to listen to your podcast. I mean, I've listened to a few and I've really loved it. And what you're talking about is it's so important, yeah. So, is there anything, Leslie, as we're coming to an end, is there anything that you would like to say that I've not given you the opportunity to?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, you've done really well. I can tell you've done this before.
Once or twice, yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Lizzie, I've been a little frustrated today because you bring so much. I've written pages of questions to ask you about. I mean, I'd say this often to guests, but goodness me, it really is so true. You offer so much, and your love of learning and your experience, and and your past. There's so much really to ask. So I've kind of felt a little bit frustrated. We've not been able to touch on everything, but I think we have touched on some important areas. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Leslie. It's been brilliant.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Back in 2005, I diagnosed myself as conjoined triplets joined at the everything because I've got like three entirely different personalities just kind of battling each other, not in a DID way. I don't want to be insensitive
No,
to people struggling
no.
in a real way, but I try to pack a lot into my life.
Yeah, Yeah, and I have to say, to resonate. I mean, I have love of learning as well. I mean, goodness me, I mean, in the fields we're in, learning is unlimited. You can constantly learn, but I have to say, I have to boundary it because I could just be doing it all the time. You know, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a lovely character strength, but as with everything, there is like perhaps a side that you do have to manage. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm waffling on. Leslie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. It's been great.
And once again, I'd like to thank Leslie so much for coming on the show. I think our listeners will agree. We covered a lot of really, really interesting and important areas. I mean, as I said during the show, I was left a little frustrated because there was so much I wanted to ask Leslie in terms of, life experience, education, and the work that she does. So we did flit around a little bit. I really wanted to ask Leslie more about narrative therapy. Narrative therapy is an approach that I use and I'm quite passionate about. So it would have been really nice to talk a little bit around narrative therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, which I know Leslie also uses. I think something that Leslie and I share is love of learning, character strength from positive psychology. And the fields we're in, as is true with, I think, a lot of fields, learning is potentially unlimited, but I think with any character strength, I guess there has to be some boundaries, really. But it has led Leslie into, knowing and training in so many different areas. And I thought the podcast that she was doing in terms of the important subjects she's covering was fascinating. And I would really, really urge our listeners to check into the podcast. I've listened to quite a few of the podcasts and I really love it. And something about Leslie's style, which is really kind of upbeat. There's a lot of humor in it as well, which I really liked. You can check out all of Leslie's links on our social media pages and with the show notes. So do please check out all of these links. Leslie mentioned the Instagram page. I would also kind of guide our listeners to her website. Her website has a lot of kind of autobiographical information on there, and obviously a lot of information about her coaching programs. And I thought it was really, really informative. I would spent time kind of going through it before the interview. And Leslie had a Facebook page, and other kind of social media possibilities of connecting with her. Really interesting. She came from a family that are all involved in different ways in the helping professions. I thought that was really, really interesting and really interesting to talk about Leslie's decision not to go into a kind of clinical psychology, psychotherapy model, but to kind of move into coaching, which I think from the kind of limited knowledge I have of Leslie, but just kind of picking up on her style really, really seems to work. And Leslie's created a very successful, career. Um, Touched on Leslie's experiences as a woman of color in the polyamorous, ethical, non-monogamy community. I would have liked to kind of maybe talk about that a little bit more. And also, we also touched on the fetishization of black women, black men within the poly community and not within the poly community. That is also another very, very important area to discuss. I'm glad we touched on it, but as ever, with 40 minutes, it's really impossible to kind of go into these areas in the detail that I would like. But I'm pleased that we did move around and did cover quite a few different areas. So I hope our listeners will agree. Really another really, really great interview. We've been so blessed with the guests on the show for all our series, and certainly for series 5. I plan now to have 2 more shows before we do the season finale. Season finale, I'm not entirely sure what we're going to do yet. I need to have a production meeting with Joe and we'll talk about that, see if we can work out something good to do for the final show. I'm interested in the next series and whether we find a theme for it, like we have with relationships in series 4, or whether we just leave it very, very open in terms of subject matters. I've already got some guests lined up for the next series. We're going to do an episode on movement and mental health. As our listeners will obviously know, from listening to me on the podcast, I'm a big advocate for exercise and movement and mental health. So that is one I'm really, really looking forward to. The guest has a lot of experience working with neurodivergent clients and clients with disordered eating and eating disorders. So that should be a really, really interesting one. The next two podcasts we're having in this series, I think we're going to have one with a lady called Ishioma, who's setting up a international register and community for survivors of sexual and gender abuse. That will be a very, very important interview. And we're also going to interview a lady called Elizabeth, who's going to be talking about PTSD from experiencing an affair. So that I think will also be another very important one. And so really, really looking forward to those two. And then, as I say, then we'll do the final show. Looking back over series 5, it has been great. I've really, really enjoyed it. And why I like doing this job is I get to speak to so many inspirational people, which is absolutely fantastic. In terms of subscribing, please do subscribe if you're listening to the audio podcast. If you're watching the podcast on YouTube, please subscribe. Please leave some comments. Subscribing is something that a lot of people that watch podcasts don't do, but the more subscriptions we have, the more kind of scope we have for guests, and it just helps us in so many different ways. So thank you to all of our listeners, as always, for listening, and do look after yourselves, look after each other, and look after the planet. And I'll see you really soon on the next episode. You take care.